Hello hockey fans, Oddman Rush here and welcome back to another video. During his 15-year NHL career, Peter Stastny was one of the greatest and most consistent players the league has ever seen. After all, the guy produced legendary numbers in the show, he set numerous NHL records, and he was one of the greatest scorers during the league's most productive era, second only to the Great One himself. Though he has left his mark on league history, and though he is one of the best to have ever played the game, Stastny's NHL career almost never happened, as the tense political landscape and the system in which he developed meant that Stastny should have played much closer to home instead. So how did he do it? How did Stastny defy the overwhelming odds against him, and how did he produce such an iconic career in the show? Well, let's explore his journey in more detail and find out, shall we? This is the story of Peter Stastny, from Soviet defector to NHL legend. Born in Bratislava, Czechoslovakia on September 18, 1956, Peter Stastny would begin his pro career in his native country, as he graduated from Slovan Bratislava's junior team and joined their senior squad in 1975. From there, the youngster would spend the next half a decade on Slovan's roster and develop into a scoring machine, as he went from potting 28 points in 32 games during his rookie year to scoring at well over a point a game in each of the next 4 seasons, registering a whopping 212 points in only 166 games during that span. As you might expect, these numbers would help Stastny earn several accolades, including a pair of spots on the Czech League's All-Star team, as well as a league championship in 1979. Oh, and the forward would also earn plenty of awards on the international stage too, including 2 gold medals and 2 silver medals at the IIHF World Championships, the most points by a player under 20 at the 1976 World Championships, as well as a bronze medal at the 1976 World Juniors too. Having notched 52 points in 41 games during the 1979-80 season, and having been named League MVP as a result, Stastny had won pretty much every single award that he could back home, so the big fish set his sights on an even bigger pond, the National Hockey League. Now, for those of you unaware, the Cold War was well underway during the late 70s and early 80s, as America and the Soviet Union battled for total dominance on the international stage. With the Soviet Union controlling many of its Eastern European neighbours, and with Czechoslovakia being well behind the Iron Curtain, the country's top players would be recruited to various teams within the Soviet Union, such as the iconic Red Army team, and they would remain with these franchises until they were told otherwise. In fact, Russia held such a stranglehold over its satellite states that they refused to let their skaters play anywhere else in the world, since the Soviet Union believed that their top players leaving the Union would embarrass it as a whole, and it would discredit the communist system if their players were to move to the capitalist countries of North America. So all of this to say that Stastny's wish of playing in the NHL was nothing more than a pipe dream, as the very thought of him leaving Czechoslovakia was treason to the Soviets, let alone him actually going through with it and making the move across the pond. However, thanks to his unwavering courage and his decisive action, Stastny's dream would soon become a reality. In late August 1980, Stastny had joined Bratislava at a European Cup tournament in Innsbruck, Austria. Several hours after game time, Stastny left his hotel room and took a walk to a nearby payphone. Here, he would make a call that would change the course of his life, as he began to dial the main switchboard of the NHL's Quebec Nordiques. After getting through to Nordique's president Marcel Aubu, Stastny informed him that both he and his older brother Anton, who was also playing at the tournament, were both willing to sign with Quebec if the team could ensure their safe passage to North America. Upon hearing this request, Aubu spoke to Nordique's director of player development Gilles Leger, and the two booked the next flight to Innsbruck, where they met with the two brothers in secret and began negotiating the details of their deal after games. When it became clear that the two sides would reach an agreement, Peter quickly contacted his wife Darina, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, and told her to get to Innsbruck as soon as she could. It was time to make their move. Following an 11-1 loss to CSKA Moscow in the European Cup final, Slovan's roster boarded their team bus and prepared for the journey home. However, the team soon discovered that the Stastny brothers weren't there, as the pair had met with Peter's wife and they had hopped in a rental car with Marcel Aubu en route to Vienna. From there, the foursome would head straight for the airport, they would board a flight to Quebec, and they would land in Canada the following day. So after spending the last half a decade playing in his homeland, and having been told that he would likely stay there for the rest of his career, Peter Stastny had just defected from the Soviet Union. It takes a lot of guts to do what Stastny did that day, but when you discover that he was just 24 years old at the time, you realise just how incredible Stastny was. I mean, the guy broke through the Iron Curtain while bringing his pregnant wife and his older brother with him. The guy had courage and then some. That said, Stastny's heist wouldn't be without its consequences. After all, not only would the two brothers become non-persons back home and have all their awards and records erased from the history books, several members of their family would also be punished for their actions. For example, the eldest brother Marian, who was also a star hockey player and who had a wife and 3 kids back home, was suspended from playing hockey in Czechoslovakia, though he too would defect to the NHL just a year later, while their father had both his job and his apartment seized by the communist government. If you're wondering why Peter wanted to defect so badly, his erasure from his homeland's record books and the unjust treatment of both his brother and his dad should explain things pretty well for you. But I digress. Having defected from Czechoslovakia and having safely landed in Quebec, Stastny wouldn't take long to join the Nordiques, as both he and Anton signed with Quebec shortly after their arrival. From there, Stastny would make his NHL debut with the Nordiques less than 6 weeks later, and though many were unsure if the reigning Czech Player of the Year would adjust to North American hockey, to say that Peter was more than capable would be the understatement of the year. Playing on a line with his brother Anton, Peter would hit the ground running almost immediately out of the gate, as he would become a key contributor from his first few games in the show, and he would help Quebec morph from a fledgling expansion team from the 1979 WHA merger to a legitimate playoff contender seemingly overnight. Thanks to his consistent play from one game to the next, and thanks to his productive performances all year long, Stastny would finish his debut year with an incredible 39 goals and 109 points in just 77 regular season games. Not only would these numbers lead the Nordiques roster and help him finish 6th in scoring across the entire NHL, Stastny became the first rookie in league history to register both 70 assists and 100 points during their first season of play. As you might expect, this performance earned Stastny the 1980 Calder Trophy as NHL Rookie of the Year. And though some might argue that he shouldn't have been eligible since he was 25 at the time and he had already played half a decade of pro hockey back home, Stastny was still regarded as a rookie within the NHL's rulebook, so he was eligible to win the award. I mean, the guy had just defected from the Soviet Union and he had recorded a 100-point season during his first year outside his homeland. If that's not worthy of the Calder, I don't know what is. While Stastny would earn several accolades individually, both he and his brother would also write their names into the record books too. For example, Peter and Anton both set a new league record for the most points during a road game and the most points by a rookie in a single contest, thanks to them each recording 8 points against the Washington Capitals on February 22nd, 1981. While they also set the record for the most points scored in consecutive games with 14, as they each had potted 6 points against the Vancouver Canucks 2 nights earlier on February 20th. So not only had he burst onto the scene and stood shoulder to shoulder with the best players in the world, Peter Stastny had been crowned Rookie of the Year, and he had written his name into the record books numerous times too. Sounds like a pretty successful debut if you ask me, folks. But how would Stastny perform in the seasons that followed? Would he build off his rookie year and keep up the good work, or would he be remembered as a one-season wonder? Well, thanks to his continued excellence for the rest of the decade, Stastny would achieve the former and so much more. Having shown that he could hold his own at the NHL level, Stastny would take his game to even greater heights for the rest of the early to mid-80s. Exactly how high did the forward climb though? Well, in the 5 years after his NHL debut, Stastny was one of the best players across the entire National Hockey League. Flanked by older brothers Anton and eldest brother Marian, who had defected from Czechoslovakia in 1981 and had joined his brothers in Quebec, Peter registered 46 goals and a career-high 139 points during his sophomore 81-82 season. He potted 47 goals and 124 points during the 82-83 season, and he notched 46 goals and 119 points during the 83-84 season. He then took a slight step backwards, and I use this term very loosely, with a 100-point year in 84-85, before bouncing back with 41 goals and 122 points during the 85-86 NHL season. So yeah, Stastny was productive during this span. Thanks to his 604 points in only 386 games, Stastny would earn a place at the NHL All-Star Game in 4 of these 5 seasons, and he became one of only 7 players in league history to record 6 consecutive seasons of 100 points or more, which is a pretty incredible accomplishment, 80s or not. Oh, and Stastny would also help Quebec reach the playoffs every single year, where he would register 56 points in 46 postseason games, as Quebec reached the conference finals twice during this span, but they failed to move past the penultimate round during either attempt. Unfortunate to say the least, but a decent resume for a team that only joined the NHL 7 years prior, right? As the league entered the late 1980s, and with Stastny turning 30 years old, the forward would continue to play for the Nordiques, and though he would see a notable decrease in his production compared to his dominant seasons prior, the forward still registered great numbers for his team. After all, the captain of the roster potted 24 goals and 77 points during the 86-87 season. He returned to form with 46 goals and 111 points during the 87-88 season, before notching 35 goals and 85 points during the 88-89 NHL season. Despite this continued excellence though, Stastny's numbers wouldn't translate into postseason success, as the Nordiques failed to reach the playoffs twice during this 3-year span. That said, Quebec would punch their ticket to the 1987 postseason, and Stastny would score 15 points in 13 games, before Quebec were knocked out in the second round by the Montreal Canadiens. Falling before the final hurdle is bad enough, but doing so at the hands of your bitter provincial rival has to sting that little bit more, right? The 1989-90 NHL season saw Stastny suit up with Quebec for his 10th year with the team, and despite him turning 34 years old just before the season began, the forward would achieve quite the milestone during this time. Thanks to potting 38 points in his first 34 games before the new year, and with January 1st, 1990 now on the horizon, Stastny had not only remained productive during the first half of the season, he had finished the decade as one of the greatest players in the league. From his NHL debut back in 1980 to his final game of the decade on December 30th, 1989, Peter Stastny had scored an incredible 385 goals and 1,059 points in just 749 regular season games. While scoring at well over a point a game for 10 years is pretty impressive in itself, these numbers helped Stastny finish second place for the most points scored by a single player during the entire 1980s, beaten by only the Great One himself. The guy scored more points than any other NHL player not named Gretzky during the league's highest scoring era. Championships or not, that's one hell of an achievement. Though he would further cement his place as a league legend, and though he had been far greater than the Nordiques ever could have hoped for, Stastny wouldn't remain in Quebec for much longer. Having potted 62 points in his first 62 games of the season, and with Quebec sitting dead last in the Adams division with just 11 wins that year, on March 6, 1990, Stastny was traded to the New Jersey Devils, in exchange for Craig Wolonin and future considerations. So after signing with the team following his defection from the Soviet Union, and after leading the organisation for an entire decade, Peter Stastny had left Quebec as the all-time leading scorer in Nordiques franchise history, thanks to registering 380 goals and 1,048 points in only 737 games. Not only would he continue to hold this record until Quebec relocated to Colorado in 1995, Stastny's 1,048 points still rank second in Avalanche Nordiques franchise history at the time of this recording, surpassed only by fellow team legend Joe Sakic. When just a single player has surpassed you in the 34 years since your departure, you know you served your organisation well. Having been traded to New Jersey, Stastny would spend the rest of that year, as well as the following 3 seasons with the Devils, where he continued his consistent scoring for his new side during the later years of his career. For example, the now Slovakian forward potted 11 points in the final 12 games of the 89-90 season and 60 points in 77 games during the following 90-91 season, as well as 62 points in 66 games during the 91-92 season and 40 points in 62 games in the 92-93 NHL season too. Despite registering 173 points in 217 games with the Devils, Stastny was unable to lift a championship with his new side. Though New Jersey would reach the postseason in each of these 4 years, and though Stastny would register 24 points in 25 total playoff games during this span, the Devils would fail to win a single round each and every year. A rather disappointing outcome, but Stastny clearly wasn't the problem here, was he? Once his contract with New Jersey had expired, and having turned 37 years old that off-season, Stastny would take a brief hiatus from the league and return to his homeland, as he rejoined Slovan Bratislava during the 93-94 season. Though he hadn't been home since defecting to Quebec, and though he last played for Slovan 14 years prior, the forward didn't skip a beat, as he scored 4 points in 4 Slovak Extraliga games before heading back to North America. Given that he was absolutely adored in his home country, and given that his defection paved the way for dozens of other athletes within the former Soviet Union, you can imagine that Stastny received quite the hero's welcome, and deservedly so. Following his brief trip home, Stastny would spend the twilight years of his career with the St. Louis Blues, as he joined the team midway through the 93-94 season. From there, the veteran forward would play 23 regular season games with the Blues over the next 2 seasons and score 18 points for the team, while also playing 4 postseason games during the 1994 Stanley Cup playoffs, though he would go scoreless during that span. Not the greatest performance of his career, but the guy was in his late 30s and he was playing in his 12th postseason run. He's allowed to have one bad playoffs, right? After playing just 6 games with the Blues during the 94-95 season, and after scoring a pair of points with the side, Stastny decided that it was time to call it quits, as he hanged up his skates for the final time and he retired from playing in the National Hockey League. With his retirement from the league, Peter Stastny had finished his NHL career, having registered an incredible 450 goals and 1,239 points in just 977 regular season games, along with 105 points in 93 playoff games too. In fact, Stastny's numbers put him in 42nd place for the most points scored in league history. And while that might not seem all that impressive on the surface, Stastny is one of only 2 players in the top 50 to have achieved this milestone in less than 1,000 regular season games. Add to that his Rookie of the Year trophy, his 6 All-Star nods, his various league records, and him being the second highest scorer of the entire 1980s, and Stastny produced a legendary career, that's for sure. If all of that wasn't impressive enough already though, this resume would also help Stastny receive some of the greatest honours a player can be awarded, as he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1998, he was inducted into the IIHF Hall of Fame in 2002, and he was named one of the NHL's greatest 100 players back in 2017. Given that he fled his homeland at just 24 years old, and given that he produced an iconic career in spite of all the obstacles that he faced, there are very few players more deserving of these honours than Stastny, at least in my opinion anyway. In the years following his NHL career, Stastny has worked several jobs in several different fields, both within the sport and elsewhere in the world too. For example, he served as a scout for the St. Louis Blues for 2 seasons shortly after his retirement. He was the general manager of the Slovakian national team during the early 2000s, and he served as a member of the European Parliament from 2004 to 2014. Sounds like being a hockey player wasn't the only thing he was good at, was it? Though he faced many difficulties before even reaching the league, and though he got a much later start than most of his contemporaries, Peter Stastny produced one of the greatest careers the NHL has ever seen. Sure, he played significantly less games than other league legends, and his trophy cabinet is pretty empty in comparison, but Stastny defied overwhelming odds just to get to the NHL, and he stood shoulder to shoulder with the best of the best for the next decade and a half. Most players would kill for a career like Stastny's, trophies or not. Say what you want about his lack of silverware, but Stastny's unwavering courage in the face of adversity, his determination to achieve his goals, and his perseverance through numerous setbacks can never be brought into question. Add to that his amazing skill on the ice, his consistent play throughout his career, and his record-breaking resume, and you have the recipe for a pretty incredible player, that's for sure. And on that note, I'm going to end today's video. That was the story of Peter Stastny's journey from Soviet defector to NHL legend. What do you guys think about Stastny's career or his journey to the league? Do let me know in the comments below, I would love to hear what you guys have to say. But thank you so much for watching guys, I really do hope you have enjoyed. Please feel free to like, subscribe, share, watch some of my other videos. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye! A big thank you to Bexy93, Burned Retinas, Drew Fawcett, Houston NG, Raquel and Worthless Pieces for helping support this video via Patreon. If you too want to help support the channel a little bit further and get a shout out at the end of every future video, make sure you head over to patreon.com/oddmanrush and become a patron today.